Welcome to this special episode highlighting the incredible work of Fairtrade Africa. My name is DONUTS. Today, we explore the impact of the DONUTS program and hear directly from those on the ground. Recorded at the DONUTS closeout meeting, this episode features Emerentia Potentia from Fairtrade Africa, Atinkosi Gosana, Senior Manager at Koopmanskloof Wine Farm, Nancy Bulongo from the Department of Labour, Lennox Mahali from NUF BWUSA, Anthony Hendricks from the Food and Allied Workers Union, and CCMA Commissioner Wilbur van Niekerk. Over to you, Patricia Tembu, who leads the conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us on Farmers Inside Track.
Emerentia, why is it important to capture farm workers' voices at the closing out of the DONUTS program?
Hi, Patricia. It's very important to really capture the voices of the workers because they were the direct beneficiaries of the DONUTS project. So it's good for me to say, yes, the project has made impact. The project did this and that and created these opportunities. But I am the one driving the project. So ultimately, those who were really benefiting from the project would be the workers. And to hear their true stories and to just see how emotional some of them became and how they created emotions within us. It was really just heartwarming and assuring to know, that these are real things that happen. These are their real feelings, their real experiences. It comes from their own mouth. It comes from their experiences and it brings validity into the whole context.
Thank you, Emerentia. And as they say, let's hear from the horse's mouth. As you said, it's important to actually capture the workers' voices. We do have Atinkosi Gosani, who is the Senior Manager at Koopmanskloof Wine Farm. Atinkosi, what opportunities have been created for you through the DONUTS wine program? If you could please share.
I'll give input from management perspective. I have been involved quite in-depthly with the DONUTS project. So what I can basically say, I'll mention three things as well. One, the notion of beyond certification between organizations, fair trade and workers. And then secondly, the capacity building that one could openly see from the workers and relations that were now much more open, where workers would be way more confident in communicating certain factors that affected them in the workplace, whether it was technically or anything socially too. So the DONUTS project really opened a lot of people's eyes in ensuring that relationship building and capacity building and also having one voice and being able to work well together as workers and management, that in its own was really just great.
Thank you for sharing, Atinkosi. And of course, management plays an important role when it comes to farm workers and the work that they are doing. And that is also where unions come into play as well. So Lennox, coming to you, maybe if you can please share how the project has made a difference in terms of the relationship between farm management and the unions.
DONUTS program, which was established, was a good thing. From my side as a unionist, I would search for certain information about gender violence, about certain offices of government. But with DONUT, the host of the whole program, I could get every government office in one because there were documents circulated and given to us and the workers as a unionist. Now I know exactly where to go if there is harassment on a farm. I know exactly where to go to about certain matters that affect the workers. And I can see that the workers have opened up a little because normally they would complain, but will not make a follow-up even to you as the organizer of the union. You'll take a matter up, and since we are working in diverse, we are holding general meetings, we are negotiating, we have to give feedbacks, we have to take cases to the CCMA, we have to take cases to the Department of Labour, at times you forget to go back to the worker, and they will, for 6 or 8 months, will not even try to touch you and say, hey, comrade, I gave you this matter and you haven't come back after 8 months. It's too long. They should come in and remind you. If you don't look at your diary pages where you put notes, you cleanly forget. Then they will come back later. Yeah, we know unions are this, in fact. But nowadays, they phone you back. That means to me that they are starting to open up. They know that they've got the telephone number. They can phone you and remind you that we are still there. We want our answer. And then, you give immediately attention to what they are talking about or the matter they've referred to the union office. I think DONUTS have made some impact, which is big. I think even the workers are starting to trust the unions.
Thank you, Comrade Lennox. I just want to stay on you on the topic of the trade unions. What was the perception that farm workers had about trade unions, and how has this program changed or shifted the general perception of how farm workers perceive trade unions, especially because they play the role of including them now in the conversations with government as well?
The workers' mind have shifted because committees are selected. I think the DONUTS program, they have to be continued, because if we don't continue with the program, then everything will fall back to what it was, because they used to depend on the committees, which only take their cases on the farm, and it ends with the employer. Now we can take the cases to the CCMA and report back to them. Yes, there are still suspicious about unions, but it's not that hard as before. So things are changing.
Thank you, Lennox. And now you've mentioned the role that the CCMA plays. So I'd love to bring in Wilbur now into this conversation. Wilbur, what key lessons did you take away from the DONUTS project about improving labor relations on the farms?
I think the first lesson is to look at the law, right? So the LRA, the purposes of the LRA, there are 4 of them: economic development, social justice, labor peace, and democratization of the workplace. In other words, getting workers to have a say in how the workplaces operate as stakeholders. Now, it's very good for law to say that, and that's been there since 1995, but we know that nothing's changed on the farm significantly. What does that mean? It means that farm workers are practical people. It means that change comes about because people want it to come about, although the law sets the standard. So people apply the law. And what this project gave us learnings of is just how workplace relations enable stakeholder benefit when there is engagement, when there's dialogue. And for us, that was interesting, because if you take the learnings here and you were to apply it across the whole agri sector, it will fundamentally change how things operate. So there's lots of learnings that came out of this. Also, the economic participation and the willingness of the owners and the supply chain downstream from the customer perspective. Consumers put pressure on supply chain participants respond, workers benefit. I think it's a very good example and a system that can be implemented.
Thank you so much, Wilbur. I'd love to take it back to the trade union. Anthony Hendricks, maybe if you could share your perspective on the difference that the project has made in terms of how workers perceive trade unions.
Before the DONUTS come in, on farms, especially the Fairtrade farms, the workers on the farm, there was already the workers' committees on farms, driven by the managers on farms or maybe selves, the owners on the farms. And when there's a DONUTS program coming in on farms, then the workers have the workshops, and then Emma invite us, and then we begin to talk to the workers, and they realize that it's better to work with a trade union, because if there's a case on the farm, then they can't go out of the farm, like to go to the CCMA or Department of Labor. The owner or the managers on the farm, they control that case there, and then nothing happened. I think it was a good thing so that the workers at the end of the day also can understand that it's a good thing to be part of the donut project.
Thank you for sharing, Anthony. And of course, Olga mentioned how the law sets the standards when it comes to labor relations. So taking it to Nancy from the Department of Labor, what has the collaboration looked like between the government and this program?
My role in the program was that I was often invited by Emma to come and give education to the workers related to health and safety on the workplace. And for me, it has always been a pleasure because it then allows us as government to be able to do one of our mandate, which is to provide advocacy. So it was a very great working relationship with Donut where I could go and I'd provide advocacy session, educate the workers, and also it created a bridge between us and the workers where some of them could come and get our direct contact and ask for advice, and we're still in contact, and they can phone you, they can send you email, or they can ask you for advice, and you can direct them to the right people.
Thank you, Nancy, for sharing that. I'd like to hear from Atin Kosi Gosani, who is the senior manager at Koopmanskloof Wine Farm. How do you see these relationships between governments and trade unions being beneficial or respectful for the workers?
I wouldn't say it really becomes difficult, but it's not difficult. But then rather, I think what opportunities need to be granted or realized is an open dialogue and proper dialogue, respect for all role players. It be government, it be the unions, or person of management. Because my role on the farm is, as a senior manager, is compliance of all certifications. So there are certain rules and aspects that one has to not only follow, but incorporate in your ways of working, which means that these opportunities are granted, these opportunities are given, and rather not blanket approach everything and making it seem like it's bad, and that management is constantly just defying certain things or curbing certain things when it comes to workers, policyholders, and the government. Like I said, but what's important is that kind of communication. Because if that doesn't happen, despondency, because we human beings, then becomes something that occurs. And due to despondencies, again, it messes up those kinds of relationships. So when it comes to respect, you give respect to get respect as well. So when communication is done properly, in that of the benefit of the worker, in this instance, like that of the DONUTS project, which is also not just inception, but rather something is supposed to be there long term. So that this platform through a program is continuous because of the kind of conversations that were had, the enhancements that were created, and capacities that were also outlined during the DONUTS project and the engagements. So now it's our time as these other role players without the specific program to ensure that that kind of engagement, communication, and plateaued, respectful way of communicating is still there. Because if it is not, we will basically rigmarole again and find ourselves in the situations that we were at as well. And also grant management too, that kind of opportunity, because remember, when and if your way of thinking is still stagnant in a saturated way, things do not change. And therefore, we need to ensure then in that kind of way that we work together, we work well together, workers understand that, and we ensure that as the core or primary beneficiaries, their voices are heard, and we take it from there.
Well said, Atin Kosi. We're hearing how important dialogue is from the trade unions, from the Department of Labor, and from farm management. So I'd love to turn to Wilbur from the CCMA. Wilbur, how can you see social dialogue being sustained to benefit farmers in the long term?
I'd simply say the framework is there. The learnings are there for how to engage. It's purely a matter of will. The suggestion would simply be keep the framework, keep the dialogue going. More importantly, allow workers to lead. In some of the training sessions that I've encountered, workers would say things, and it's very obvious when they say it, that HR is dictating or HR is helping or they step back. And actually, we want workers to be leaders and not just to sit there and nod their head. Otherwise, you're never going to get change. And then I would implore, please, can the unions be included? Because there's a big problem when it comes to the CCMA. and the workers are not being told this, and they need to be informed that if you have a case at the CCMA, the workers' committees or anybody else or even advice officers can't really help you. You need a union to be able to represent you. And in the process, in the dialogues and conferences, meetings, the same message was coming through from the unions all the time. It's difficult for them to make entry. It's difficult for them to be heard. And I think they also perceived incorrectly. So I'm making an impassioned plea that in the LRA, in the rules of the CCMA, the unions play a fundamental role. So if you want justice to be delivered, then you've got to include unions. And this archaic approach to trade unions being trouble causers must stop, because it's been in the Constitution from 1996, Section 23. There's all sorts of rights that workers had, including the right to strike. There's the right of freedom of association. If you want to keep this going, workers must be empowered and listened to. And you have to have structures for that, respect for workers, and they've also got to be given a voice. For me, those things are fundamental. We can build all sorts of fairy tales around that, but the fundamentals must be in place. If that's not there, you go backwards.
Thank you. Well, the unions need to be included. I think we should turn to the unions just to hear from them now. Lennox and Anthony, whoever wishes to take on the question, how do you plan to build forward now that the DONUTS project has come to an end? I think hearing from either of you, we'll start with Lennox. How do you see this project continuing?
I think we should all participate and maybe look for sponsors if it is ending, but it should not be ending, because the whole thing which is already established will fall back and happen very quick. And it's years that DONUTS is there, the program. Now, to lose it now, it means that will be 10 years back if it falls down, because workers easily listen to employers who want to exploit them, because in certain companies that we represent, Section 197 of the Labor Relations Act says if there is a change of management, everything goes on, stays the same. It's already there, so it should not be changed. But management will tend to say that, no, everything is not going to change. Write down that Section 97 and use a certain language which will maybe leave the workers perplexed by saying in a certain sentence that after agreeing that Section 197 is saying no change, the next line will say, no, everything will stay the same largely. The workers signed that document. And you find out after a year, you were given such a document. Why didn't you peruse it and try to understand? Because Section 78 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act says that you can seek for advice, don't answer you, and you point the word that largely does not mean that there will be no change. Now management is changing it to that there will be changes. So we get such problems. So I think DONUTS should be going on, and the assistance that we get from DONUTS is used, because now that we are in democracy, the head offices at times tend to relax in the unions and not do the work as they ought to do, to advise us and all that. So it becomes a problem if there is no partner who is helping us like DONUTS. Everything I see, it's noteworthy what DONUTS is doing. It's intensive for the workers to progress.
Thank you very much, Comrade Lennox. Turning over to Anthony, do you agree with Lennox? And maybe if you can share what your thoughts are on how this DONUTS project can continue forward from the trade union's perspective.
I agree with my comrade there, but you see, there's nothing we can do when DONUTS is come to an end. But the smart thing that we have a discussion on now, and I talk about now, CCMA, Department of Labor, workers on the farms, etc. We agree now to go for a bargaining council. So yes, I think that is now the way that we move, where we include all the farm workers at the end of the day. I think that is a very important part of our relationship with Fairtrade and all the other trade unions and all the partners who is in the wine sector. We are willing to move forward with this thing. We know that it will take time. We have our first meeting already, and we will go forward with that. So we include all the farm workers at the end of the day, the bargaining council.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Turning to the Department of Labor now, Nancy, what role does the labor regulations play in protecting farm workers, and how can initiatives like that influence labor policies going forward?
Department of Labor, obviously, mandate is looking after the well-being of workers, from checking on working conditions, going all the way to health and safety. So seeing programs like DONUTS, probably that can inspire then government to work together with agencies, with I'd say private agencies, that we work together, that we are not all working in silos or in our different boxes, but that we should use programs like this, we should use organizations like this, and work together and then create a bigger impact. Because at the end of the day, we all have one common denominator, and it's the well-being of workers. So if government can get inspired, probably to include that in their laws, saying, okay, we need to form partnerships with organizations like this. We need to work together for the benefits of the workers.
Thank you, Nancy. I love how you put it, that working together has a larger impact. And I think we can have Nkosi come in here. What would you like employers and policymakers to better understand about the relationship between management and workers?
I'll also start off by saying I can totally echo what Nancy is saying. Again, if we do not work well together, nothing is going to change. And the best bet, again, insinuations. Let us rather get to a point of working well versus what we know. I think we need to give credit where it's due as well. And I'm also sure Emma can counter that. Within the DONUTS project and some of the farms that they've worked with, they can openly see that change has come or change is taking place. Because again, communication, collaboration, and working well together instead of a them and us kind of notion. And how best can I ensure that one is working lesser than that of the other, instead of really incorporating, collaborating, and making sure that this happens. The DONUTS project was a platform. Again, I'll say this. It's a platform. So now the onus is entirely up on us. And onus meaning every single person that also played a role within the program. Because if management or company managers were anti such engagements or ways of incorporating a lot of things, I think as Fairtrade Africa or even as Fairtrade, invitations to certain employers or to all employers would then not have been there, because now if employers were also not involved, we would not be able to have the notions or even have that kind of form of understanding, because influence is there. Within the Fairtrade producers networks or producer organization, other organizations also want to see themselves excel and move towards a way in which that kind of collaboration and that positivity is there, because at the end of the day, the beneficiaries are the workers. So when it comes to perceptions and still constantly thinking of what has been and all the negative, it takes time for us to move forward. So let us work well together. Let us incorporate and collaborate and ensure that, again, even though the platform was there, the work still has to be done.
Thank you, Nkosi. Of course, we hear how collaboration is foundational for the DONUTS program and everything that has come from the program to be carried forward. So, Emerensha, how did you ensure that the DONUTS program remains sustainable and everything that has come from the program is replicable, if you can put it that way?
Yes, and I want to echo what Commissioner Wilbur said, as well as Nkosi also just reiterated and said in terms of that relationship. We really build on that relationship to be a solid one where we have social dialogues, we have joint discussions, even if it's uncomfortable discussions at times, but the discussion is happening. And I think, to have established those social dialogues where workers, management, government, trade unions can sit together in a room and just to talk about things, that is a wonderful initiation that should continue beyond DONUTS Wine Project. Other things that has been established to ensure sustainability of the project has been the precarious working group that is also meeting on a quarterly basis, where all these parties also sit and work and discuss around issues that needs to be discussed in terms of working relationships and working conditions. Comrade Anthony has also referred back to the Agricultural Bargaining Council for the Western Cape wine industry that we are also planning. And this is not something, we cannot leave anybody out of the equation. We cannot leave the workers out of the equation. We cannot leave the producers out of the equation. We cannot leave trade unions out of the equation. We cannot leave government out of the equation. So ultimately, it all comes back to taking hands and moving forward and not looking back, as Atenkosi has also mentioned, not looking back, but really focusing on the good things that's been established through the DONUTS Wine Project. Otherwise, all of this will be undone if we have had a mind shift to say this is how we move forward and this is how we build on to what has been established. Other things that has been established was the training of farm workers as trainers so that they themselves can even train on the farm. And this has created huge improvement in the self-concept of agri-worker to think that I can even do training on the farm where I'm working. That has really been something really impressive that we have established through the DONUTS Wine Project. Ultimately, it's up to us, to build forward on all these sustainability platforms that has been created and ensuring that the good things that has come through this project continues and remains intact beyond project implementation.
Thank you for sharing, Emma-Rentia. So yes, we do hear how Fairtrade has ensured that the outcomes of the project continue to progress. So I'd love to hear from Wilbur now, from the CCMA perspective as well. What advice would you give other farms or even other industries looking to replicate, what the DONUTS Wine Project has been able to achieve?
There's a couple of things. First of all, if anybody wanted to replicate the project's success, I'd say please contact Fairtrade. Contact the farms who were involved in the project. There are good results. There's also pitfalls, but there's lots of learning. And if they can learn the good and avoid the bad, things will be great. I love what Emma just spoke about, where workers become the trainers. That's excellent, because when you empower people to empower other people, change starts to happen, thinking changes. And then in terms of the LRA, so there's a section 78, which is about workplace forums. That's a specific part of the LRA, and many of the principles in there already being applied in this project in a slightly different way, but the principles are there. And so there's lots of learnings that does align with where the law wants to go. And so anybody wanting to go forward could actually learn from there. What I would also encourage is then to say to employers, please contact the CCMA for training. We have a whole database of training. It's market competitive for them to pay, and the benefits are huge in terms of their management, their employees, and the way their businesses operate. And they can contact us. In terms of how we move forward, we measure how many cases we see. And when we see fewer cases, it's an indication that there's less conflict or there's less dissatisfaction in terms of labor practices, in terms of fairness in dismissals, etc. So we measure that. At present, we have 4.2% of our total referrals coming from the agri sector. It's been mentioned that there's a bargaining council being formed. The CCMA 100% supports the formation of the bargaining council. I think the work and the thinking that's going into it, the collaboration, certainly on the union side, is very good to see, and there's lots of potential. Now, the big buy-in is going to come from the employers. And if the whole sector, and this is just the wine sector, if that sector can be reformed, if that sector can come to the table with a set of standards, and you find that all workers benefit at the same levels, it's a new day in that whole industry. I'm aware of one particular case at the moment, and I won't mention names, but let's just say that there was an amalgamation of a number of farms, and what happened was they discovered that benefits were differing between the farms. So if you standardize, things become a lot easier to manage. And so those are some of the pieces of advice I would offer to anyone going forward, and definitely would encourage them to learn from the DONUTS model.
Thank you so much, Wilbur. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add to the conversation that maybe we didn't touch on?
One of the learnings for me from the CCMA is a program like this only works if you've got a driver. It doesn't happen by its natural attrition. And Emma proved the point because of her excellence in the way that she dealt with us. And she took the learnings, she changed things, and she really moved forward. I think you're looking at the results because of that. And we mustn't miss the fact that a program like this requires a certain skill set that she demonstrated over the years. And I didn't want that to be missed. And it wasn't in the questions, but it was an observation. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Wilbur. Are there any other closing remarks, comments from anyone?
I agree with Wilbur. I've seen Emma saying things in a smart way so that you can grasp what is going on in the whole program.
Thank you, comrade. Anyone else?
I just want to say, Emma, well done on this program and the platforms that it created, really. And let us, I think, continue with that kind of zeal because it really has had a lot of impact. And your work, we cannot, not mention that and let it go undone because it needed really, like Robert said, a driver that is not only just going to do this because it's a 9-to-5, but a passionate being and one that really wants to create change in this industry for our people, etc. So well done. And we will ensure, let us really concentrate on having that kind of positivity and doing better together. Thanks.
Thank you, Patricia Tembu, for leading such an insightful conversation. We also extend our gratitude to all our guests. Emorentia Patentia from Fairtrade Africa, Atinkosi Gosana, Senior Manager at Koopmanskloof Wine Farm, Nancy Bulongo from the Department of Labor, Lennox Mahaili from NUFB WUSA, Anthony Hendricks from FAO, and CCMA Commissioner Wilbur van Niekerk for sharing their experiences and expertise. Your contributions help us understand the real impact of the DONUTS program and the incredible work being done on the ground. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for more stories that highlight change in agriculture and labor.